Welcome to Patty's Place, a place where we'll talk about grief, dementia, and caregiving. This podcast I started in honor of my mom, Pat, who passed away from dementia about 2 years ago. And so I wanted to talk about things that help all of us. My name is Lisa, and so grab your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, or if it's a really bad day, grab a glass of wine, and we will get together and talk. So today we're actually going to talk about grief. So our guest today is Lisa Wrights. She's a certified grief educator with over 40 years of experience in healthcare. She brings understanding of emotional and physical healing to grief, and she has a book out that's called Navigating Grief and Divorce. You also have a booklet that's Navigating the Holidays with Grieving, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Correct.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a grief educator?
Sure. So, as you said, I've been 40 years in healthcare, and I'm a respiratory therapist. So, I've dealt with mostly terminal patients
Okay.
my entire career. So, I was looking for something to kind of stay with that feeling that I have compassion and empathy, and discovered this certified grief educator and went to school and grabbed onto it, and I'm loving it. And work with patients. Work with clients and groups, just talking about grief, educating on grief, and working with a lot of caregivers and friends, trying to educate on grief also and handling grief with others.
Okay. And working with caregivers, so you talk a little bit about like the anticipatory grief
Correct.
with that,
Yes.
because that's a difficult one to deal with, when you're in the middle of it all.
It definitely is. And I think a lot of people, especially if it's a family that's the caregiver,
Mm-hmm.
they don't understand, and they kind of tend to get frustrated at times. Especially, you were talking about your mom with dementia, and this show's about dementia. My mother also just passed in March,
Mm-hmm.
and she also had dementia. And we had family members that were caregivers, and we also had nurses that came in, who were very compassionate. But for my sister who lived with her, it got very frustrating at times because just not understanding and that repetitive motion that dementia patients have. So just trying to work with the caregivers and help them to understand. One of the biggest things I found, especially with the patient themselves, is that they don't really want to be where they're at either. And I think that's something as a caregiver we don't understand, that when they're repeating those stories, or they're telling you things, sometimes they're not remembering that they've told you, and sometimes they're just highlights in their life that they want to relive. And kind of just sit there and listen. I try to tell the caregivers, be patient, be passionate, and just let them tell that story if they want to tell it 5 times. It's okay to listen to that and try not to get too frustrated, because the patient themselves is probably extremely frustrated that they don't have control over that anymore in their lives. And that can be very scary for both people.
Like it is, and the other thing too I experienced with that anticipatory grief was that I knew she was going to get worse, and so like
Mhm.
there were things that like my she was in memory care, and she was able to use the phone for a while. And so some days, I'm not exaggerating, sometimes she called me like between 15 and 30 times a day. Sometimes she'd hang up
Mhm.
the phone and call again. And
Right.
people would tell me, the nurses, and that you don't have to answer it all the time. And I did answer it as much as I could. Obviously, if I was at work, I couldn't all the time. But I knew in the back of my mind there was going to come a time when she couldn't do it anymore. And I knew I was going
Right.
to miss that. And so I
Right.
realized that things like that, like, and like 1 minute they can walk really well, and then the next minute they can't. And with any illness, 1 minute they're doing okay, and the next minute they can't. And I don't think you think about that as a caregiver, that is anticipatory grief, you know.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
what do you think people don't understand about grief?
I think it's not to say it was a taboo conversation
Hmm.
back in the day, but I feel like it's just something that's never spoken of. Um, Parents try to protect their children from it, because it's taught that it's just such a sad thing,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody should have to deal with sadness at a young age, or no one should have to deal with sadness at certain times. When there really is other ways to get past and have other people learn about grief. Um, I do feel I do feel we're all of us in society are just undereducated on the stages. I think people are undereducated on what grief really entails. That I've found with clients will come to me and they'll be like, well, I lost my job, and but my mom died. Well, the loss of the job is also grief.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, maybe your child has moved away. That also can be grief. And I think people just don't understand that. And it's okay to feel sadness, and it's okay to go through the stages of grief when there is something like that happens. You shouldn't just push it aside. And I think as society, we're just taught that. Um, so I'm trying to educate more on the okay part, that it's okay to feel the way you do. And your life might look a little different.
Exactly. Yeah, people and they think that there's a timeline and there isn't with it, whether it's you lost a loved one, you lost a job, a major breakup in your life,
Mhm.
relationships, and even pets. That's a
Even
huge
pets.
yes, that's a huge
Hmm.
relationship, and there isn't a timeline. And some days you might feel good, and another day you're
Hmm.
just like I'm, crying your eyes out, or you're angry, or you're not sure. And I agree with you. It's a taboo. People don't. Oh well, like, well, you did the funeral now. Okay, you're back to work.
Right.
Let's not talk about it. And you need to feel those feelings. Um,
Right. I do talk about that a lot with now that you brought up work. I,
mm,
I think grief in the workplace is something that needs to be taught, because you're exactly right. My mom passed away. I got my 3 days off from work.
mm-hmm.
A couple days later, my mom was going to be buried because she was going to a veteran cemetery and they didn't have a place for her at that time. And I needed to take one more day off. And, my boss was like, okay, you can take a personal day,
Yeah.
and yeah, and that's exactly it. And it's just people don't understand it. And then you're expected to come back to work fully okay. You're
Yes.
not allowed to have those moments where I might need to step out of the office and cry for a half hour,
Mm-hmm.
or, and I just think, and I'm working towards trying to create some programs for work, workplace grief, because I think there is a need for it and an education for it.
I would agree with that, because even when you are back, yeah, they expect you to be at 100%, and your brain just isn't.
Uh-uh.
You're still in a fog. Like, I know those first couple months when I came back, I can't even tell you what I did. I know I probably made tons of mistakes, just because.
Mm.
And then all the other stuff you have to deal with too. You've got the banks and the insurance companies and all that. And I helped my dad with all that. But it's so much, and you're just not supposed to
Right.
talk about it or say I'm having a bad day today,
Mm-hmm. Right.
with it. Or I went to the store and I saw this and this upset me, or I heard this song, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. And like you were saying, that's exactly when grief pops back up. And
Mhm.
and being it has no timeline, you could hear something a year later and
Yes.
it would remind you of the person who passed, or your breakup, or
Mhm.
what, your pet, and it still brings you down, and it's okay. you know I working with again with caregivers or with the anticipatory grief, and trying to tell people, just listen to what others have to say, and try not to say to people that might be in grief, you should be over it by now, or I just don't want to hear about your loved one anymore, or oh my gosh, you never stop talking about that person. Maybe that person really just needs to speak of them, and just sit quiet and let them speak, and just say, wow, I understand that, or yeah, I, feel for you. But, I think a lot of people don't know what to say when they're talking to others that are in grief.
I would agree with that. I also think there's quite a loneliness to grief
Yes.
because you do feel like you can't talk for after a certain point. You're like, no, I can't say any more about this or that. It makes other people uncomfortable. Where
Mm-hmm.
I know at a certain point I told some people, like, I find comfort in talking about my mom.
Mm-hmm.
That made me, I wanted to talk about her and that. But yeah, a lot of people are like, oh no, you should be over it. Why are you, you,
Right.
you know, in I went through grief counseling through our hospice because my mom had hospice at the end.
Okay.
And it was so, I tell everybody how wonderful they were because they have groups too, support groups and different workshops
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. And the one thing everybody says is, I don't feel alone because you're in this room full of all these other people that have experienced the loss and they know exactly how you
Mm-hmm.
feel, you know,
Right.
with it. So what are some suggestions that you give to people who are going through grief and maybe it's their first time and they just don't even understand what's going on with them?
Right. So my first thing that I always tell my clients, the day one, is to journal.
Mhm.
Journaling is a really big part of grief, I believe, for help. Whether you want to journal those pages, rip them up and throw them at a wall, or you want to journal lovely stories about that person and keep those stories. Journaling can be in many, many different ways. But if you're having a down day or you're just not sure what to do, just grab a notebook and write some things down, and it really helps to make you feel better. Definitely, I agree with you. Talking to somebody such as, a grief educator like myself, or
Mhm.
going through grief counseling. Groups are always good, and you can find groups at almost all the churches now. They usually run grief groups. With the world today and the way it is, there's so many people that are just grieving general society.
That's true. Yes.
There are some really angry people. There are some very sad people. And yeah, definitely getting someone to walk beside you and help you through that, I think is a big step.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. And sometimes too people don't realize you might see something on TV and that makes you think of your loved one,
Mhm.
or you hear a story or that and you don't know why you're feeling that way with it. So, can you maybe explain to people what's the difference between a grief educator like yourself and a
Mhm.
therapist?
So a therapist works more with you in, I want to say, more like problem solving, giving you ways to feel about yourself,
Mhm.
where a grief educator walks beside you and helps you educates you and helps you to understand what you're going through at the time you're going through it. So I usually meet my clients where they are. Some are angry, some are in bargaining, some are in acceptance. Just depends how long they've been in grief.
Mhm.
And then I usually will walk beside them and give them, ideas depending on where they are at that point. Again, we always talk about journaling, but it could be, I just did a lot of education through the holidays. So we just got past, some major
Mhm.
holidays, and people not just sitting and talking to them and explain to them that when you're at your family's function, that it's okay if you want to step away from the table if you don't like the conversation, or maybe you're just feeling really sad. And if it's at your house, it's okay to go upstairs. Don't feel like you're not allowed to step out of the situation. Some suggestions I gave to people was to make sure they had, I hate to quote an escape route, but
Mhm.
a way out in case they needed to leave.
Mhm.
Because sometimes it really can get daunting, or you think you're going to be able to make it through a function and you get there and you just absolutely can't. And some people don't understand that. So, you know what? I'm not feeling well, and you step away, and it's okay to be able to do that. So, as a grief educator, we are just educating through the stages and educating along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's hard too because sometimes you do have family members or friends that they really don't understand where you say like I need to leave or I can't do that right now. And sometimes they get mad
Hmm.
at you and
Right,
and you don't know how to handle that. It's hard.
right.
And then you kind of grieve that relationship too because it changes.
Hmm.
with that.
Right. And normally if I had, a client come to me, I think the difference between myself and a therapist, where a therapist would be, well, how did you feel after that? And how did you handle it? Where I would be more educating on that situation and maybe how we could have looked at it differently, or how are you feeling now and how are you going to move forward with that feeling? Because just like you said, that relationship may now change, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it does. And when we were talking about anticipatory grief or like the holidays
Mhm.
or different events, I got an invitation today for a bridal shower for a
Mhm.
family, and of course I'm going to go because it's a really important person in my life. But it hit me because I realized this is the first type of event, bridal shower, wedding, that I'm not going with my mom.
Mhm.
And like without her, and I always went to those things, together. And I'm
Right.
like, oh,
Right.
this could be kind of hard for me.
Sure.
Even though
And it's going to look different.
even though I'm going to be with family and I'm going because, she's an important person in my life, but it's like,
Mhm.
that's going to be different for me. It's
Right.
a new thing,
And here's the thing, the people there aren't going to realize that it's going to be different for you.
no, they won't. And
They're not going to realize.
no, they won't. And I know that going in. So like
Right.
I have to prepare,
Mhm.
for those. But all those different types of things that you
Right.
don't associate with grief all the time, and
Right.
they just pop up.
They just pop up. Yes, they do.
Yeah, and you're like, "Oh, why am I feeling like this?" And you're like, "Oh,
Mhm.
this is why."
Even this year, I said my mom passed in March. My mom loved to watch football.
Mhm.
And Sundays, my sister would bring my mom over and I would hang out and, we'd watch the football games. And, uh, you know, this year looked very different for me
Mhm.
because she was not there to watch football with me every Sunday. And I've done that for 60 years, watch football with my mom and dad,
Yeah.
but now it was different. And, for some people, that might have been here that day, it was like, it's another Sunday at Lisa's house having chili and watching football. But for me, my mom wasn't there now. So for me, it was different and it looked different and it felt different.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And sometimes you just don't even have the words to explain how it
Mm-mm.
feels. There's just like this emptiness type of a thing. And I do think it is, your life is like before and after, so to speak.
Mhm.
How you have to kind of handle it and think about things
Right.
with it. So you recently wrote a book?
I did. I did. It's on grief and divorce.
Okay.
Again, another thing I didn't realize that grief, when you're getting a divorce or end of a relationship has to do with grief
Yes.
because nobody tells you that. I've watched many people in my life get divorced. Nobody talked about the grieving process of it, but it is a loss and it's a major loss. And it's going to reshape you and redefine you and change your life and the way it looks moving forward. So it does have all the steps of grief. But my book each chapter talks about a different stage of grief. And then it's also my journey through my divorce. So, if it's the anger stage, I do talk about myself going through that anger stage and how I handled it and worked my way through it. And then it has some journaling pages and some questions for people to be able to answer about their own relationship. And then it's about maintaining family bonds because my ex and I were able, after we got through a lot of it, we're able to come out of this with a friendly relationship, which really works for my kids. So that's also in there. But if people can't find that, I hope they can just find some peace and maybe get some ideas to help them through their divorce through the book.
Yeah, and
I
most
just felt it was a story that needed to be out there because people just don't realize the two go together.
no, they don't. And then when you say it, you're like, well, of course it would, because it's a loss.
The loss.
Even when both people know it's the right thing and everything, it's still a
Mhm.
loss.
Right.
With it. Yeah, and sometimes people are going through a divorce and a loved one is ill, or they're going through different
Mhm.
things, and it can be compounded with the grief
Correct.
with it. You
Yes.
don't even understand. I see on your website you also help people understand the different types of grief that you have on there.
Yeah, I do list a few different ones. Because there, like you said, there's anticipatory grief. There's types of grief that come from suicide.
Hmm.
There's types of grief, again, that come from end of relationship. So there are different types of grief that you could have. So yeah, I do explain a little bit about that, and I do deal with mostly all of them. I personally don't usually take on clients that have done suicide because I don't have a lot of experience in my personal life with that. And as a grief educator, we usually try to pair up with things we have experience in. So it's a little bit easier to be able to help that person if I've been through the same thing they have. So yeah.
And another one on here too, like the delayed grief. I think that
Hmm.
happens to a lot of people because sometimes when you're in the middle of it all, whether it's going through a divorce or caretaking and you're doing all that, sometimes you don't allow yourself to feel all those
Right.
things. And then it could be 6 months later and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what's happening? You know,
Right. Right. Or like you said, a couple of things will happen and it will compound it, and then all of a sudden you fall into the stages. And yeah, I mean, you could be going through all the motions. Like you said, there's a lot to take care of when a loved one dies, with banking and taking care of all that, and you could get through all of that. And then maybe you're getting near a holiday or near their birthday and you start to get really angry
mhm.
because now you're like, whoa, what is happening? And why did you leave? And I have all these things to do, and if you didn't leave, I wouldn't have to take care of this. And then you kind of start that delayed grief because now you're moving into some of the phases that you haven't experienced yet.
And my dad, it kind of happened to my dad a little bit like that. I mean, he was there with me taking care of my mom and all that, but right after she passed, actually that day she passed, he starts cleaning out her room, like that morning. I was looking at him like, seriously, and then he was just like, he had the checklist of everything he had to take care of. And then we actually went on a really, really nice trip to Ireland. So then he was all
Hmm.
focused on that until we went
Hmm.
on the trip. And then after that, he felt like completely fell apart. He wasn't feeling right. He wasn't sleeping. He had, he drove his car onto the sidewalk because he fell asleep, like all this stuff. And then he's like, I think I might have
Right.
dementia. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously? Like, but
Right.
but he hadn't really took the time to focus on his grief.
Right, right. So he was probably experiencing delayed grief because, yeah, you're getting, and that's the same thing like when you're pushed through the motions, you're even in the beginning when you're pushed through the wake and the funeral, and,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's around, and then all of a sudden everybody goes home. And
Yes.
now we have to have real life. So in your situation, like you said, he was cleaning things out. You went on a trip, and when he came back,
Mm-hmm.
nobody was there now. And everybody's life went on, and his is going to change now.
Yeah, and so I was like, I mean, I got him into grief counseling and that, and it's helped him, and stuff. But I was just like, and we,
Right.
took him to the doctor. We got him all checked out, and he's doing
Right.
better and stuff. But yeah, I could see
Right.
that because it was like, well, yeah, it was a lot better, more fun to focus on going on a trip than
Sure.
to deal with everything else. But
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there can be a delay in the grief process.
yeah,
Again, because I think people don't really understand the whole grieving part. So you think, well, yeah, I'm grieving because my mom passed, and okay, now we're done with everything. So I'm back to work, and that's it, back to reality. I'm not allowed to grieve anymore because I'm not. But you are, and you're allowed to hold that the rest of your life if you want to. you know um but always trying to move forward with that grief, and you can always hold on to that grief, and I tell people that, and you can still move on and have joy in the other hand, and still hold your grief. No one says you have to let go of that.
exactly. Yeah, I think people feel like, oh well, eventually I have to, and you don't. They're always with you. I that's what I believe
Right.
anyway.
Right. Me too. Me too.
Yeah. So if somebody is interested in purchasing your book, how can they purchase your book?
It's available on Amazon and
Okay.
barnesandnoble.com. There is a link on my website also, which is lisawrightsgrief.com. There are free resources on there if people need anything. I do a monthly blog they can read. I do have a newsletter they can sign up for. And if people are interested in additional help, you can sign up for a free consultation and we would take it from there to see if this is something you need.
Okay. So I will have the link to your website uh, on the podcast page. So it's LisaWrightsGrief.com. I'll put
Correct.
that on there. And I was looking on your website. You do have a lot of good resources on there.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And that's where I saw actually you had is it like a pamphlet or a little book about the holidays too?
Yeah, and I actually have a few now. I have one about surviving grief. So I have three ebooks now that are out
Okay.
along with my book. So and if they go to the store, there's a store, the books are all available in there, the ebooks.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes those are good for people to have just to recognize it
Right.
for that.
Maybe understand what they're going through.
Yeah, because a lot of people, they just don't. They don't. eh, Everyone's going to experience it, but we just don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And we need to because
Right.
we need
Makes
to.
us feel better.
It does. It really does. It sounds crazy, but it really does make you feel better.
Right.
When you can talk about your loved one or even just to feel like you're not crazy of what you're feeling,
Right.
or like,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, for it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Patty's Place.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I'll have the link to your website and your book on there as well.
All right. Sounds great.
So I hope everybody has enjoyed this edition. So I hope you enjoyed your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, or your glass of wine, and you just sat back with us and realized that you are not alone in all this. And we'll catch you next time on another edition of Patty's Place.